In his past life, Song Yuning was designed by his illegitimate sister to marry a scumbag, raise a son from an extramarital family, and assist the scumbag in achieving success and fame. But after using her, the scumbag killed over 100 members of her Song family. She was even made a swine to please the outside room. Reviving her life, she had the intention to avoid the tragedy of her past life, but was rejected by a scumbag. Since that's the case, she doesn't mind killing her husband. Chapter 1. What can she do to me if I don't go? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Madam, it's time you got up and went to serve the old lady. Song Yuning heard someone gently pushing her body, and the familiar voice was clearly the voice of her close maid Chuha. She has already jumped off a cliff, hasn't she? How can people remember the past after death? Madam. Her arm was pushed again, and she suddenly opened her eyes, with an enlarged familiar face in front of her. Chuha. Song Yuning widened his eyes in disbelief as he looked at his intact face in front of him. At this moment, her eyes subconsciously recalled that Chuha had been made into a person. Madam, the old lady has come to urge you again. If you don't go, you may be troubled by the old lady again later. Chuha said, with a hint of fear in his eyes, and instinctively touched his arm. Upon seeing this, Song Yuning extended her hand and suddenly lifted her sleeve. I saw that Chuha's slender and tender arms were covered in terrifying scars. There are things that can be twisted by hand, things that can be whipped, and even more terrifying is a large, blistered burn. Who did this? Song Yuning's voice was as cold as ice. Mississippi. Chuha instinctively called out her pre-wedding address. Didly mama do it? Although it was an interrogative sentence, Song Yuning's tone was extremely determined. How many days has the old lady been sick? Chuha looked at Song Yuning, whose body was as cold as frost, and his originally panicked heart slowly calmed down. Madam Hui, the old lady has been sick for 3 days now. 3 days. Hee. At this moment, Song Yuning has confirmed that she is reborn. Reborn to the 5th year of her marriage to Xiao Jianqing. That is the 4th day of Xiao Xiaoqing's return. No mistake. On the day of their wedding, Xiao Jianqing, the general of the Great Chu state, did not even lift his head and left her, heading straight to the border. It takes 5 years to go. I didn't come back until 4 days ago. Surrounded by a beautiful woman like flowers and 2 children. The 2 boys, one big and one small, addressed Xiao Jianqing's father and the beautiful mother of Ruan Shishir. The scene of questioning Song Yuning in confusion. He stepped on the face of General Song Yuning, the wife of the general, in an impressive manner. Until today, it is still being used as a joke by tea houses and restaurants in the capital city. Since Xiao Jianqing left on his wedding night, Madame Xiao has been filled with disgust toward Song Yuning. He cursed her as a bereaved star. If it weren't for her using despicable means to force Xiao Jianqing to marry her, their Xiao family wouldn't have separated now. Faced with Madame Xiao's insults, Song Yuning could only silently endure. After all, in the end, Xiao Jianqing was also a victim of this matter. Because at the beginning, she was designed by her illegitimate sister to be drugged, and when her life was on the brink of death, it was Xiao Jianqing who saved her. The two had a skin-to-skin relationship in front of everyone. Therefore, although she was the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion, she could only hastily marry Xiao Jianqing, a small general. Unfortunately, at that time, Xiao Jianqing already had a sense of belonging and was as proud as if he had been forced to marry a woman he didn't love, and the other person looked even more icy. This was the wedding night, and he didn't even lift his head, so he went far to the border. Over the past 5 years, Song Yuning's position in the Xiao family, as a general's wife, has been inferior to even a servant. It is normal for daily clothing consumption to be compromised. Being punished to kneel and copying books is something that happens every now and then. If it hadn't been for Mrs. Zhao's teasing, she wouldn't have slipped and given birth prematurely, resulting in stillbirth and losing the qualification to be a mother. I thought that after causing her to lose her child, Mrs. Xiao would have some restraint. But she didn't want to, in exchange for it, only to become even worse, and she became the mother hen in Zhao's population who couldn't lay eggs. I thought that even if Madame Xiao looked down upon her daughter-in-law, she would still consider the face of the Wuhou mansion. Just something she didn't expect, the punishment and abuse that never fell on her, actually fell on her personal maid. Looking at the terrifying wounds on Chuha's body, Song Yining felt that the raging anger in his heart was almost condensed into substance. This was the case in my previous life. Madame Xiao deliberately pretended to be sick, using the pretext of having her serve the illness to challenge her in various ways, in order to force her to recognize Yuan Shishi's child under her own name. If she can't achieve her goal, she's just targeting the people around her. She used to be too cowardly. With the word filial piety pressed down, in the face of Mrs. Zhao's coercion, one could only endure and retreat. So much so that later, Chu He was falsely accused by Yuan Shishi of seducing Xiao Jianqing, and after the 50th National Congress, he was sent to sell the mansion. But later, she learned that Chuha was not sold at all, but was made into a human figure by Yuan Shishi and put in the backyard to abuse. If she remembers correctly, in a few months, Yuan Shishi's identity will be discovered by the people of the government and she will become the eldest lady of the government. And the Wuhou mansion her father and brother were exposed by the officials of the government and became traitors. More than 100 people in the entire Wuhou mansion were beheaded, and the crimson blood stained half of the sky in the capital city. After the fall of the Wuhou mansion, Xiao Jianqing did not hesitate to demote her to a concubine. For her, Xiao Jianqing had never touched her before, and whether it was his wife or concubine, her situation in the Xiao family was described as a servant. If you just become a concubine and end up in the backyard, that's all. But what she didn't expect was that once again, Prince Su, the third prince, came to the general's mansion as a guest and accidentally ran into her. I was drooling over her unparalleled beauty. After learning about it, Yuan Shishi actually directly sent her to King Su's bed, allowing her to be sexually harassed and humiliated by King Su all night. After that night, Prince Su asked Xiao Jianqing to leave her. She became one of the many women in the backyard of King Su. King Su is naturally promiscuous, and changing women is like clothing. And when she was given as a plaything by Xiao Jianqing to Queen Su, her heart turned to ashes. King Su felt that although she was unattainable in beauty, she was too boring in bed. After playing with her for a while, he despised her. She was handed over to someone else. Under great humiliation, she found an opportunity to jump off a cliff and commit suicide. When she woke up again, she was reborn into the general's mansion. "Mississippi madam, can I help you tidy up? If you don't go to the old lady's place again." Chuha looked at Song Yuning's changing expression and let out a deep sigh in his heart. My own young lady is really too kind. The old lady is clearly pretending to be sick, deliberately teasing my own young lady, bullying her and being weak in nature. She won't go back to the mansion to complain. Although she was the legitimate daughter of the noble Marquis of Wu, Jin Zunyu, she was arbitrarily bullied in this small general's mansion and lived a life worse than even a servant. If Marquis Lord and Marquis Lady knew, I don't know how much it would hurt. No need to comb or wash. Go tell the old lady that I'm not feeling well and I can't go to take care of my illness today. Song Yining waved his hand, continued to cover the brocade quilt, and continued to rest. To revive her life, she needs to tidy up her thoughts and continue fighting with that old witch when she comes back. Mississippi this. Upon hearing this, Chuha was surprised and decided not to go. Well, she probably didn't have hallucinations. I'll just report back like this. Why, the vast Xiao family just needs me as a general's wife to serve the old lady. I want to see. If I don't go today, what can she do for me? Song Yuning gave a cold smile. In her past life, she was determined to please Xiao Jianqing, so she naturally allowed old lady Xiao to challenge herself. But now live a new life. Xiao Jianqing. Damn it. If you commit any offenses below Chapter 2, you should be punished. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Before Song Yuning could sort out his thoughts, he heard a rude and arrogant voice coming from outside. Where's Madam? The old lady is awake and looking for her. Hurry up and have Madam go to take care of her illness. If it delays the old lady's recovery, can you bear this charge? Upon hearing this familiar voice, Song Yuning coldly curled her lips. Indeed, she is worthy of being the lackey of Mrs. Zhao's side. Such arrogance is simply following her master. Chuha's timid voice rang out. Li Mama, my wife is feeling unwell and still lying in bed. She really can't go to serve her anymore. Please work hard, Li Mama. Are you feeling unwell? Madam, isn't she slacking off? Li Mama's mocking laughter, even through the door, clearly penetrated Song Yuning's ears. The old lady is used to her attendants. We servants, who are all clumsy, cannot serve the old lady. For the sake of the old lady's health, please work hard for her. As her words fell, the door was forcefully kicked open from outside. Li Mama's old and ferocious face appeared before Song Yuning's eyes. Madam, you haven't slept yet. It's so good. Come with me to the Fushou Hall to serve the old lady. If you go late, the old lady will blame you. Madam will suffer a lot. Okay. That's great. Looking at Li Mama, who was arrogant and domineering, Song Yuning smiled angrily and slowly sat up, pulling on the outer robe beside her and casually putting it on. Li Mama's eyes flashed with a hint of sarcasm upon seeing this. What if you are the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion? Married to their general's mansion, you still have to be honest and humble. Although Li Mama is just a servant, she can still challenge the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Wu in the general's mansion. Feeling proud in her heart, Li Mama only heard a crisp sound, and a burning pain came from her face. She touched her hot face in disbelief and said, You hit me. Pop. With another round of applause, Song Yuning looked coldly at Li Mama and said in a deep voice, Dog servant, who gave you enough courage to break into my wife's room? You. Li Mama stared at Song Yuning in shock. How dare you? Although Song Yuning is the young lady of their general's mansion, she has always had a soft personality. Not to mention the old lady and young lady, even the servants in the mansion can step on her. Could it be that today I was stunned and couldn't do it, and dared to wield a hoop against her, the trusted grandmother in front of this old lady? It seems that 2 slaps won't make you, a lackey, recognize your identity. As she spoke, Song Yuning slapped Li Mama's face with a heavy slap and said in a cold voice. A servant is just a servant. No matter who stands behind me, I can't go as far as the master. Even if Song Yuning has a good temper and can't be favored by the general anymore, he is also the legitimate young lady of the general's mansion. You dog servant, how dare you break into my room? Who gave you face? Kneel down. The last 2 words carry endless majesty. As if thunder had fallen into Li Mama's mind. Unconsciously, let her legs soften and she knelt to the ground. When she regained her senses, she looked at Song Yuning's seemingly indistinguishable face, but at this moment, it was full of imposing aura. Her words were so eloquent that she couldn't utter a word. Song Yuning looked down at her disheveled posture and coldly called out, Chu He. Chu He, who had been staring blankly on the side, quickly agreed upon hearing this. Give me a call. What did she do to you on weekdays? Give it back now. Madam. Upon hearing Song Yuning's words, Chuha was immediately stunned. Song Yuning looked at her timid expression and raised his eyebrows, saying, I dare not fight. Let's go back to the Wuhou mansion. There are no useless people left by my side. Since she has decided not to accept adversity anymore, she naturally cannot leave a weak and deceitful person around her. If Chuha cannot do it, then sending her back to the Wuhou mansion and helping her choose a reliable husband would be the best choice. Madam, please don't go back, I dare to fight. Upon hearing Song Yuning's words, Chuha suddenly became anxious. When she was a child, she was almost sold into a brothel by her parents, and it was the young lady who bought her. From then on, her life was given by the young lady. How could she leave the young lady? Thinking of this, she took a few steps and came to Li Mama, looking at her. Seeing her with a red, swollen, and ferocious old face staring fiercely at him, Chuha's anger surged in his heart. With a lift of his hand, a heavy slap landed on Li Mama's face. What are you staring at me for? Even if you bully me on weekdays, you actually bully my wife. My wife is the legitimate daughter of Jin Zuanyu, the noble marquis of Wu's mansion. She is the legitimate wife of the general's mansion. You, as a mother, have committed the following crimes and deserve to be punished. The more he said it, the more angry Chuha became. He slapped Li Mama's face more than ever. Li Mama slapped her face, her veins bulging in her hands, and her eyes glared at Chuhi in front of her like poison. I secretly made a decision in my heart, not to speak up, but to wait for Madame Xiao to come and save her. After overcoming today's challenge, we must find a way to kill the slut in front of us. As for Song Yuning, she didn't have the heart of Madame Xiao and the general. Without Chuha, the only trustworthy person, she would be equivalent to having no eyes or ears in the general's mansion. There are many ways to challenge her in the future. Song Yuning leaned against the soft collapse with an indifferent expression, admiring Li Mama's resentful and unwilling expression. She could naturally guess a bit about this old servant's thoughts. However, since I have taken action, how could I be afraid of such a bully and cowardly dog servant? A servant is a servant, even if he is favored, he is just a master who can buy, sell, and kill at will. Li Mama, I'm afraid she's overconfident. Stop it. Finally, when Chuha's hands were swollen and painful from the beating, a voice filled with anger came from outside the door. With the help of two nannies, Madame Xiao walked in from the door with a cold expression on her face and looked at Song Yuning angrily, saying, Song Yuning, who gave you the courage to take action against Li Mama? Someone, pull this ignorant and lowly maid down and die with a cane. Upon hearing this, Chuha's face turned pale. He instinctively glanced at Song Yuning, but did not ask for mercy to avoid causing trouble for his own young lady. Anyway, at least she beat up Li Mama before she died, which can be considered as a relief for herself and the young lady. Even if you die, you can still rest in peace. Who dares? Song Yuning stood up straight and looked directly at Madame Xiao. Chapter 3, Pull down the cane and die. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Song Yuning, are you crazy? Madame Xiao looked at Song Yuning in shock, unable to believe that she was the daughter.in.law who always agreed to her and didn't even dare to look at her directly. She's not afraid, did she let her son rest her? Don't forget, madam. Although Chuha is my dowry maid, the deed of sale is still in the Wuhou mansion. She is not a servant of the Xiao family, so she cannot be disposed of by your Xiao family members. Song Yuning sneered and looked down, completely devoid of the usual pleasing attitude towards Madame Xiao. You. Song Yuning, is this your attitude towards your mother.in.law? When Mrs. Xiao heard the three words, Wuhou mansion, her heart skipped a beat. You should know that since Song Yuning married in, because Mrs. Xiao is very afraid of others mentioning their Xiao family's climb to the Wuhou mansion, they have tried to mention the Wuhou mansion as much as possible to avoid angering Mrs. Zhao's sensitive nerves. Song Yuning smiled. The so-called inferiority complex and arrogance refers to the mother and son of the Xiao family. In the 5 years since she married into the Xiao family, they have eaten all the dividends of the Wuhou mansion, but they still have to show a lofty and disdainful attitude to disgust her. It's really nauseating. I don't know my attitude, what's the problem? Song Yuning's subtle rhetorical question made Madame Xiao choke. Without waiting for her to speak again, she continued to ask. On the contrary, while I was lying in bed and resting, Li Mama disregarded the obstruction of my maid and kicked open my room door, forcibly breaking into my room. What's wrong with me, as the wife of the general's mansion, punishing her? Li Mama is following my orders. So it was you, madam, who forced her to kick open my door and break into my room. Song Yuning frowned and withdrew his faint smile, saying, if that's the case, my daughter.in.law can only go to the Empress Dowager to ask if as a mother.in.law, she can treat her daughter.in.law like this. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Zhao's face changed and she quickly put away her anger. She changed into a smile and said, Yuning, how could you think that way? All of this was initiated by Li Mama, a lackey servant. Don't misunderstand me. Song Yuning nodded and said, I guess so. Madam, at least you are also the old lady of the general's mansion. How could you have done those things like a rural shrew? This servant's actions are clearly deliberately distancing the relationship between our mother.in.law and daughter.in.law. This matter must be punished severely. How do you want to punish Grandma Li? Madame Zhao's heart sank. Li Mama was her dowager and could be said to be the person she trusted the most. If Li Mama had fallen here today. After all, she is the dowager of the old lady. Song Yuning sighed and saw that Mrs. Zhao's eyes lit up. He then spoke calmly and said, if we just kill like this, it would be a bit cruel. In that case, let's hit the 30 big board and sell it again. Upon hearing her punishment, Mrs. Zhao's face suddenly darkened. Li Mama is an elderly person with a pension of 100 yuan. If she goes down to 30, even if she doesn't die, she will lose half of her life. Not to mention selling it, isn't it equivalent to cutting off her arm? Yuning, you also said that Li Mama is my dowager. Such punishment is really too heavy, so you are not afraid. Will others say that you are unfilial as a daughter.in.law? Mr. Xiao looked at her with a threatening expression and said. The old lady's words make sense. Song Yuning lowered her eyes and reflected, after all, I am too young and inexperienced in handling things. Why not let me go back to the mansion to consult with my mother first, or go into the palace to ask the Empress Dowager? Don't be so troublesome. Madame Xiao quickly spoke up, joking if she really asked. Whether asking the lady of Marquis Wu or the Empress Dowager, their general's mansion will become a target of public criticism. A small third-ranked general's mansion treated the legitimate daughter of the first-ranked marquis's mansion in such a way. At that time, Xiao Jianqing's career path will have no future to speak of. Just do as you say. Madame Xiao helplessly avoided Li Mama's pleading gaze. Compared to a servant, it is natural that her son's future is more important. Li Mama was pulled down with her mouth covered, but Mrs. Xiao did not leave. Instead, she sat down in front of Song Yuning with a hesitant expression. Song Yuning naturally knew her purpose, but she just listened leisurely to the painful cries of Li Mama being beaten while sipping the tea in her hand. After finishing the board, Mrs. Xiao couldn't help but speak up, Yuning, how have you considered what I said the other day? What does the old lady mean? Song Yuning pretended to be foolish. Madame Xiao took a deep breath and only then did she suffer the loss of a Li Mama. If this matter is not resolved again, why should we have to endure it to death? It's natural for you to recognize Brother Lu as your legitimate son. Madame Xiao forced a smile on her face. After all, today's Song Yuning is unprecedentedly tough, and she naturally cannot use the same attitude as before to avoid causing trouble. After all, no matter how soft Song Yuning may be, she is still the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion. Yuning, I know that it was a bit inappropriate for Jianqing to suddenly bring Wan Shishir and her 2 children back without notifying you beforehand. But who didn't keep your child back then? Otherwise, I wouldn't say anything today about making you recognize Brother Lu as your legitimate son. After all, you have been married for 5 years without any offspring, and this is a violation of the 7-out rule. Seeing that Madame Xiao still didn't forget to threaten herself, Song Yuning smiled lightly and placed the teacup in her hand on the table, not light or heavy. She looked up at her calculating eyes and said, "What Madame means is, if I don't agree to accept Xiao Jinlu as my legitimate son today, will you let the general dismiss me?" Mrs. Xiao did not directly answer her question, but just spoke up. "Yuning, as the mistress of the Xiao family, you should take on the important responsibility of raising children for the gradual Qing dynasty. You don't have to suffer from the hardships of being pregnant for 10 months, and you have no objection to having such a big child like Lu Gur. Moreover, as the biological mother of Lu Gur, Wan Shishir has no objections. Why don't you choose not to do this? Don't you need me to suffer from October pregnancy?" Hee hee. Song Yuning sneered and said, "Since the old lady is so magnanimous, why did she end up aborting all the pregnant aunts of the old master in the first place? You don't have to suffer from pregnancy in October. Isn't it good to have so many sons for nothing?" Bold. Please shut up. Upon hearing her speak so blatantly about her unpleasant and filthy past, Madame Xiao suddenly became angry and embarrassed, staring at her with a pale face. Song Yuning never even raised her eyebrows and eyes, her voice so cold that it felt like a gentle breeze rolling in from outside the courtyard. As the mistress of the Xiao family and raising children for the master, the old lady is already in charge of her duties. How come it's your turn not to do it? Chapter 4. Return to Wuhou Mansion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You. Song Yuning, please shut up. Mr. Xiao raised his finger to Song Yuning, his body trembling like a sieve of bran, wanting to drink and scold him back, only to find that he had just scolded her when she replied to him. I was speechless for a moment. Song Yuning looked at Madame Xiao with a cold smile as if she was about to die from anger. She turned her head and scolded the 2 nannies beside her, saying, "What are you 2 doing in a daze? Didn't you see the old lady getting sick? Why don't you help her go back to her room and rest?" Upon hearing this, the 2 maids were startled and quickly stepped forward to help Mrs. Xiao. And Mrs. Xiao also knew that she couldn't please her today, so she had to take advantage of the situation and let the 2 maids support her as she walked out. Behind her, Song Yuning's cold and heartfelt voice came again. "Madam, since you're sick, take good care of yourself. Don't be delusional about those unnecessary thoughts. My grandson of the Wuhou mansion can't be any unknown cat or dog." Ah! With such heartfelt words in her ears, Mrs. Xiao didn't catch them in a breath, her eyes darkened, and she fell into a coma. "Madam! What's wrong with you, madam? Hurry up. Hurry up and invite the doctor." The 2 maids, upon seeing the situation, dared not even seek help from Song Yuning, so they hurriedly left with Mrs. Xiao in a fight. Upon seeing this, Chuha beside him couldn't help but stare blankly. "I thought that even if I didn't lose half of my life today, I wouldn't be able to win back." Unexpectedly, it was Lady Xiao who left in a disheveled manner, abandoning her armor. "Her wife is really amazing. Madam, you are really amazing." Chuha looked at Song Yuning with a look of admiration on his face, feeling that a long time ago, the young lady who was dressed in bright clothes, full of anger, and boastful had returned. Such a young lady is the legitimate daughter of their Wuhou mansion. Silly girl, is that enough? Song Yuning didn't tell her that all of this was just the beginning. The real tricky opponent is not the paper tiger like Mrs. Xiao, but the seemingly harmless white lotus. Wan Shishir. In my heart, Madam is always the most powerful. Chuha blinked his sparkling eyes, laughing so hard that he couldn't even see his teeth or eyes, and even forgot about the redness and swelling on his hands. Song Yuning smiled and glanced at her hand before saying, "Next time you hit someone, remember not to use your hands. No matter how others hit you, just give it back." Chuha nodded repeatedly. She used to endure because her wife asked her to. Now that her wife can't bear it anymore, as a maid from the Wuhou mansion, she naturally doesn't have to endure anymore. Prepare the carriage, let's go back to the mansion. Song Yuning quietly instructed that after Xiao Jianqing returned, Madame Xiao began to pretend to be sick and trapped her in the general's mansion to serve as an attendant. Now that this old devout woman has been resolved, it's time to go back to the mansion and explain to my parents, to soothe their hearts. The Wuhou mansion is only a little over half an hour's drive from the general's mansion. Since getting married, Song Yuning has rarely returned to his mansion. After all, Xiao Jianqing herself is not in the capital. As a married person, if she often goes out alone, it will damage her reputation. Not to mention, Mrs. Xiao, in order to trap her well, left all her affairs to her just a few days after she married into the general's mansion. She is busy with the affairs of the harem every day, but unfortunately, Mrs. Xiao refuses to delegate power. She has no real name and is in a state of anxiety. It's too late to deal with all the tedious matters. How can we escape and return to the Wuhou mansion to meet our parents? Looking at carved beams and painted rafters, the majestic Wuhou mansion, Song Yuning's eyes couldn't help reddening. Who could have imagined that the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion, who was raised by Jin Zuanyu and Zhong Mingding, would lead such an unbearable life after marrying into the Xiao family? After 5 years of being a widow, I am now being humiliated by my husband in such a disgusting way. And now, there is only one path before her, and that is Heli. Yes. She wants to separate from Xiao Jianqing. Big sister. It's big sister back. At this moment, a clear voice came. Song Yuning followed the sound and saw a man in white, dressed in orchids and jade trees, dismounting and standing in front of her, looking at her with surprise. Sister, why don't you just go in when you're back? Song Yanche looked at Song Yuning with confusion. When he saw her blushing eyes, his face changed and he said, Sister, why are you crying? Did your brother die? Law bully you? I heard that when he came back a few days ago, he brought other women and children. Is this true? Seeing the young man ask several questions in succession, even before he could answer them himself, his handsome face turned red with anxiety. Song Yuning quickly shook his head and gestured for him not to be in a hurry. Yan Che, don't be in a hurry for now. We'll talk when we enter the mansion. Okay, big sister, go in quickly. My parents will definitely be extremely happy when they see you back. Song Yanche quickly reached out and pulled her towards the Wuhou mansion. The tears that Song Yuning forcefully suppressed at the door finally flowed uncontrollably upon seeing the Wuhou couple. With the words, father and mother, spoken, she immediately threw herself into the embrace of Lady Wuhou, burying her head in her chest and letting her tears run wild. Yuning. Yuning has returned. Mother's good daughter, you've been wronged. As expected by Song Yanche, Marquis Wu and his wife were both filled with joy when they saw Song Yuning. However, upon hearing her crying, this joy turned into endless sorrow. The pearl of their Wuhou mansion, after marrying someone, suffered injustice. Yuning, Dad knows what that scoundrel Xiao Jianqing did. What Dad wants to know now is, what are your plans? After seeing Song Yuning's emotions stabilize, Marquis Wu Song Zhenyan asked. Dad, I want to leave. He Li. Upon hearing Song Yuning's words, both Song Zhenyan and Lady Wuhou fell silent. In this world, women are inherently difficult. And the woman who left is seen as an ominous presence. Apart from becoming a nun, there is basically no other way to make a living. If possible, they naturally do not want their daughter to take such a path. Yuning, the woman brought back by Xiao Jianqing, even if he likes her, she can only be a concubine at most. And as long as we have the presence of the Wuhou mansion, Xiao Jianqing dare not do anything to spoil her and destroy her, even if she doesn't spoil you. So, are you still determined to leave? The Wuhou couple looked at their daughter with heartache in their eyes. If it weren't for such an incident back then, how could they have been willing to let their daughter marry Xiao Jianqing? I thought my daughter would get married with a generous dowry, even if she didn't have a matching family background. Who would have thought that Xiao Jianqing was such a person? But parents, have you ever thought that in case Xiao Jianqing points his finger at our Wuhou mansion because of this marriage? Chapter 5. We cannot sit idly by. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Upon hearing Song Yuning's words, Song Jinyun's expression froze as he looked at her and asked in a serious voice, "Yuning, what do you mean by that?" "Dad, the marriage between Xiao Jianqing and me was supposed to be out of place. Over the years, in order to help Xiao Jianqing match our family as soon as possible, my dad has taken many photos of him in the military. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't have repeatedly made great achievements in the border and would have been beheaded and exposed in the military." When Song Yuning thought of his past life, Yuan Shishir stood in front of him with a proud face, saying that Xiao Jianqing relied on the support of the Wuhou mansion to make those contributions. If it weren't for his father's repeated indulgence in deliberate delegation of power, Xiao Jianqing would not have been able to attract the attention of Prince Su and enter his camp, nor could he have dealt with the Wuhou mansion so smoothly. Every time she thought of these things, she felt as if her heart was dripping blood. However, Dad didn't know that Xiao Jianqing was ambitious and wanted more than just a match for the Wuhou mansion. "Yuning, what do you mean?" Song Jinyun was startled and a thought flashed through his heart. What he wants is always to replace it. Thinking of the tragic fate of over 100 people in the Wuhou mansion in his past life, Song Yuning's eyes turned cold, with a murderous intent that he had never seen before. Instead, Song Jinyun's expression turned cold, and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. As a Marquis of Wu, he was a marquis who was killed on the battlefield, and he was not a simple person. "Yuning, why did you say that? This matter is not insignificant, he naturally needs to be cautious." Song Yuning was very clear in her heart that what she said was indeed unbelievable, and it was not easy to make her father believe in her. However, she could not watch the tragedy of her past life unfold, only to reveal her own rebirth. "Has Dad ever heard of past and present lives?" "What do you mean?" "Dad, Mom, Yen Che, I don't know if all of this is a dream or if the heavens can't bear to see more than 100 people in our Wuhou mansion die on the guillotine again, that's why they pity and give me a warning." Song Yuning took a deep breath before slowly recounting everything he had experienced in his past life. "Yuning, do you mean that in your dream, a few months later, our Wuhou mansion will be completely destroyed due to being found guilty of rebellion?" Song Jinyun looked at his daughter with disbelief in his heart. Plotting rebellion. Their Wuhou mansion has been a loyal minister throughout history, how could they possibly rebel? No mistake, and this crime of rebellion was exposed by Xiao Jianqing. Later, it was Prince Su who went to the Wuhou mansion with him to steal the family, and he had already colluded with Prince Su. Until now, Song Yuning still cannot forget. In his past life, Xiao Jianqing held on to Yuan Shishir and talked about the scene of copying the family in front of him, watching as the treasures of the Wuhou mansion were used by Xiao Jianqing to soothe Yuan Shishir's heart. Finally, Yuan Shishir depicted the scene of over 100 people being beheaded in Wuhou mansion in front of her, admiring her agonizing expression. Piancheng, because she was favored by Prince Su. Xiao Jianqing and his team, in order to prevent her from dying, sent 2 nannies to watch over her, and poured her soft muscles and scattered them onto the bed of Prince Su. Xiao Jianqing colluded with King Su. Upon hearing this, Marquis Wu's face became even more solemn. If this is true, then the situation is indeed very serious. "Yuning, how can you prove that what you said really happened, rather than the dreams you had due to excessive thinking?" Song Yuning had already considered the possible doubts his father might have and immediately spoke up. "If Dad doesn't believe it, a decree will be sent from the palace in the afternoon to marry the second daughter of the Minister of Revenue to Prince Su as his concubine." Since marrying into the general's mansion, Song Yuning has hardly heard of any external affairs. The reason why she knew about this matter was entirely because in her previous life, Prince Su went to the general's mansion and overheard it while discussing it with Xiao Jianqing. Now it happens to be used to prove everything one says, not a dream. Upon hearing this, Song Jinyin felt relieved and nodded, saying, "So, let's wait for this news." In his opinion, it is almost certain that what Song Yuning said was all about dreams. After all, in these days, they have not heard any rumors that the emperor is going to marry Prince Su. Moreover, even if the emperor really wants to marry, it should be a legitimate consort. How could it be possible to give the second daughter of the Minister of Revenue to Prince Su as a concubine? However, Song Jinyin's heart had not yet fallen into his belly when he heard his trusted aide Lianqing running to report. "Marquis, it's amazing, it's really amazing. Just now, Li Gonggang went to the Ministry of Revenue's Shangshu mansion with the Emperor's marriage decree, saying that he was going to marry the second daughter of the Ministry of Revenue's Shangshu and give it to His Highness Prince Su as his concubine." What else did Lianqing say behind him, but Song Jinyun couldn't hear a word. Not only him, but also the lady of Marquis Wu and Song Yenche sitting on chairs with pale faces. How could it be? Did the emperor really grant marriage? How could it be? That's the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue, how could she be married to Prince Su as a concubine? Song Jinyun waved his hand to signal Lianqing to guard outside the door, then turned his head to look at Song Yuning and asked, "Yuning, do you know what the reason is?" Upon hearing him ask this question, Song Yuning's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness and a mockery. The reason is actually very simple. In the end, it's just because the second daughter of the Minister of Revenue was destroyed by King Su. What? Several people didn't expect it to be this reason. And this reason made everyone's expressions even colder. They naturally also thought of Song Yuning. If it weren't for her innocence being destroyed by Xiao Jianqing in the beginning, how could they have let themselves hold their precious daughter in their hands and marry Xiao Jianqing? At the end of the day, it's not surprising that Xiao Jianqing would collude with Prince Su. They are the same people, using the same means to achieve their goals. Song Yuning's eyes were full of shame. The reason why King Su tried every means to marry the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue, and his actions were naturally better, to win over the Minister of Revenue for his use. Song Yenche suddenly stood up and said with a cold expression, "Dad, since the elder sister has proven that everything she said is not a dream, it means that the incident of our Wuhou mansion being falsely accused of rebellion will also happen, and we must not sit idly by." "You're right, we can't just sit idly by." Song Jinyun paced back and forth slowly, his thoughts spinning rapidly. Nowadays, the marriage alliance between the Minister of Revenue and the Prince Su has made him unable to ignore Song Yuning's words and find a path to perfection for their Wuhou mansion. Chapter 6. Decisions and Departures. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Prince Su is the third prince of the Holy Emperor today, born of Empress Rong. The crown prince of the state of Chu has always been a legitimate ruler. Therefore, whether it is to establish a chief or a legitimate heir, the Prince Su cannot be a candidate for the position of heir. Now that the emperor is advanced in age, the court's efforts are becoming increasingly inadequate. His Royal Highness has been bedridden due to his old illness and has not appeared in front of anyone for a long time. King Su is now diligent in forming factions for personal gain, and his thoughts are clearly evident. If it's really like what Yuning said, Xiao Jianqing and his team want to frame us for rebellion, they need to first put the evidence of rebellion into our mansion. Song Jinyun's thoughts were spinning rapidly as he spoke, so, the study and backyard are of utmost importance. We must guard them tightly. Not only that, the people around my father in the military also need to pay more attention to see if there are any spies. Song Yuning's eyes were condensed, and his heart couldn't help but be filled with regret. In his past life, he devoted himself wholeheartedly to the backyard of the Xiao family, handling the affairs of his harem and neglecting the affairs of the Wuhou mansion and the court. If it were not for this, it would not be possible to provide more clear information to the father now, except for the general direction. Yuning's words are not wrong. Song Jinyun nodded and said, even if some people used to be trustworthy, we still need to pay attention to whether they have been bought. At this moment, he couldn't help but feel remorseful. Even if his daughter married Xiao Jianqing, he shouldn't have delegated power to Xiao Jianqing so quickly, so much so as to increase the other party's ambition and create a backlash. Song Yuning watched as her father did not show any signs of decadence or fear due to her words. Instead, she continued to comfort her and breathed a long sigh of relief in her heart. A few people studied the current situation carefully until they felt there was nothing wrong, and then they finally felt relieved. Yuning, since you have decided to reconcile with Xiao Jianqing, why don't you stay in the Wuhou mansion today? Tomorrow, I will accompany you to the general's mansion to bring up the matter of reconciliation. Father thinks that since Xiao Jianqing wants to deal with the Wuhou mansion, would he leave with me so happily? Upon hearing this, Song Jinyun frowned and said, so, that incident 5 years ago. Song Yuning sneered at herself and said, although there is no conclusive evidence, my father feels that she was just a commoner daughter of Song Yulian. How could she have such great abilities? While calculating me, she also calculated Xiao Jianqing. So, Xiao Jianqing has been plotting against our Wuhou mansion since 5 years ago. Song Jinyun slammed the table heavily, his anger burning in his heart. At the same time, he was more concerned about his daughter and became a chess piece for Xiao Jian's settlement of the Ji Wuhou mansion. Even if we have successfully separated from Xiao Jianqing and the Xiao family, even now. But the reputation of my daughter and the 5 years of her life can never be regained. With this in mind, Song Jinyun said in a deep voice, so, Song Yulian must have colluded with Xiao Jianqing back then. She and her Aunt Lan should have thoroughly investigated each other. If I had known that earlier, I shouldn't have pitted this sister. Speaking of Song Yulian and Aunt Lan, Lady Wuhou was filled with guilt. Marquis Wu Song Jinyun was not a person obsessed with women, and she was the only wife in the beginning. Aunt Lan, who was the younger sister of her mother's compatriots, drugged Song Jinyun while she was pregnant, and then became pregnant with Song Yulian. I originally thought it was my own sister, so I made a face of her and became Song Jinyun's aunt. Who would have thought that she was not a worry-free person, and her daughter Song Yulian was even more of a disaster. It was Song Yulian who drugged Song Yuning and caused her to commit suicide to Xiao Jianqing, resulting in Song Yuning's tragedy over the past 5 years. After this incident, they only thought that Song Yulian was caused by the jealousy of her daughter's family. After beating her up, they locked her and her birth mother, Aunt Lan, in a rural farm. But now it seems that things are far from being so simple. Seeing Lady Wuhou once again falling into self-blame, Song Yuning quickly spoke up and said, Mother, it's not your fault for this matter. If Xiao Jian had really set his sights on me, even without Song Yulian, he would have come up with other ways. The most important thing for us now is to find out whether Song Yulian has colluded with Xiao Jianqing, and how much their mother and daughter were involved in the murder of the Wuhou mansion. Upon hearing her say this, Lady Wu nodded repeatedly and said, You're not wrong. Marquis, this matter cannot be delayed any longer. We must arrange it quickly. At this point, she paused and said, if they really participated. Then not only will they investigate, but also the Li family. The Li family is the mother clan of the Wuhou mansion. Being able to say such a thing, she naturally made a great determination. Now she is from the Wuhou mansion. Her husband and children are all here, and she naturally does not allow anyone to harm them. Even among those people, there is her sister, and even her parents and brothers. Although the Wuhou couple wanted Song Yuning to stay at the Wuhou mansion, in order not to startle the enemy, Song Yuning decided to return to the general's mansion first. As for the matter of Li, she decided to take the initiative to explore Xiao Jianqing's attitude through the matter of Ruan Shishir. Although she knew he wouldn't agree to leave, now she has come to the Wuhou mansion. After returning to the general's mansion, if he doesn't do anything, it will actually make Xiao Jianqing start to doubt. If it had been before, for her, separation was indeed a good choice. But now it seems Song Yuning's mouth curved into a cold smile. Losing one's husband may not necessarily be a good choice. With his thoughts settled, Song Yuning let out a long sigh of relief. At that moment, the carriage suddenly came to a stop, and there seemed to be some commotion ahead that prevented the carriage from passing. Song Yuning lifted the curtain of the carriage and only then thought of a sound when he saw a furry little thing darting into the carriage. She was taken aback. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that it was a cat with a snow-white and colorless body. Meow. The little cat looked up at Song Yuning, flicked its furry tail, and lightly jumped onto her lap. It was lying on her lap like this, squinting its eyes comfortably. Seeing this, Song Yuning couldn't help but feel a bit amused. The cat didn't recognize anyone and stuck to him like this. However, looking at the cute appearance of the cat, she felt a bit of joy in her heart. She raised her hand and gently stroked its hair, and it turned out to be a smooth and luxurious silk, with an excessively good texture. This cat has extremely clean fur all over its body, and it is obvious that there is an owner. I don't know when the owner will come to find it. The thought flashed by when a voice came from outside the carriage. Ha! I saw Snowball running this way, why is it missing? Chapter 7. Are you your mother? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing this soft and cute voice, Song Yuning inexplicably felt a soft sensation in her heart, as if she had been lightly touched by something. Without waiting for further thought, she reached out and lifted the car curtain, looking outside. I saw a little boy who looked like he was 4 or 5 years old, searching outside for something. The boy was born extremely delicate and beautiful. Wearing a luxurious and gorgeous coat, it does not conceal the boy's innate spiritual energy. It's as if Guanyin sat down and the boy accidentally entered the human world, without any trace of worldly smoke and fire. And what was most surprising was that the boy had a pair of crystal-clear purple eyes. Looking at the boy's incredibly beautiful purple eyes, Song Yuning felt a strange sensation rising in her heart. She couldn't explain what this feeling was and instinctively spoke up, "Little one, are you looking for it?" The little boy followed the sound and looked at the carriage. When he saw Song Yuning, he was stunned for a while before finally looking at the cat in her arms and exclaiming in surprise, "Snowball, so you're here." As he spoke, he bounced his 2 short legs and was about to climb towards the carriage. Seeing that he could never get on, Song Yuning smiled knowingly and gestured for the coachman to escort him onto the carriage. The little boy got on the carriage and was not afraid of being born. After taking the snowball from her hand, he blinked his clear big eyes and stared at Song Yuning intently. "Little one, why are you looking at me like this?" Looking at the little boy with a look of wanting to get close to him but feeling embarrassed to do so, Song Yuning instinctively lowered his voice and asked softly. "Are you your mother?" the little boy whispered, holding the snowball in his arms. "What did you say?" Song Yuning was taken aback, thinking that she had heard it wrong. "Are you the mother of Tuanzi?" The little boy spoke again, looking at her with admiration in his eyes. Upon hearing this, Song Yuning confirmed that he had not misheard. Looking at the little boy in front of him who was cute enough to make people's hearts melt, his heart softened. He raised his hand and rubbed his furry head before saying, "Are you Tuanzi?" "Well, mother, I'm Tuanzi, and Yuanzi is still in the mansion." The little boy Tuanzi nodded and looked up and asked, "Mother, do you want to go back to the mansion with me to see Yuanzi?" "Yuanzi misses her too." "Tuanzi, you can't call me mother. I'm not your mother, you can call me Aunt Ning. Although Song Yuning felt reluctant, he still said so. I think this little girl must have never seen her mother before, so she mistook her for her mother. And the only reason for this is that his mother is no longer in this world. Thinking of this possibility, looking at Tuanzi's soft and cute appearance, her heart couldn't help but ache. She is not a sentimental person, it's just that the child in front of her is too heartbreaking. Furthermore, there is another reason. If her child is still alive, it should be about the same size as the group in front of her. What Song Yuning didn't expect was that after hearing her say this, Xia Chuanzi immediately blushed and looked at her with tearful eyes. Mother, don't you want Tuanzi anymore? Tuanzi is very well behaved. She can eat on her own and take care of Yuanzi, so she won't have to work hard. Mother, don't you want Tuanzi in Yuanzi, okay? This. Watching Xiao Tuanzi's tearful expression, Song Yuning immediately panicked. Xia Chuanzi, I'm really not your mother. Don't cry, he said hastily, meow. Snowball, held in Tuanzi's arms, obediently rubbed against Song Yuning as she saw him crying so sadly. Her round eyes, which were full of humanity, looked at Song Yuning with a hint of reproach. Song Yuning felt at a loss when she saw the person and cat in front of her. Did she get falsely accused by the two little guys in front of her? Fortunately, just when she didn't know what to do, she saw that the road ahead finally opened up. And a few guards with anxious faces walked towards this direction. When they saw the little boy on her carriage, they all looked relieved. My little prince, I have finally found you. If I can't find you again, I will really apologize with death. One of the butler-looking men was so excited that he almost cried when he saw Tuanzi. Watching them look like this, Xia Chuanzi pouted angrily and said, I'm just coming out to find Snowball. If I find Snowball, I'll go back to my mansion. Why are you so nervous? I'm not a 3-year-old anymore. Upon hearing this, even though everyone was still in shock, he couldn't help but laugh at his lovely words. Yes, the young prince is not a 3-year-old child anymore. He is already 4 years old. Since you also know that I am 4 years old, then when I leave the mansion, there won't be so many people following me anymore. Seeing that everyone recognized his words, Xia Chuanzi proudly praised his belly. Sure enough. As my grandmother said, he is now 4 years old, not the 3-year-old child who doesn't understand anything. Now that I have found my own mother, can I live with her as I please, without having to look at my father's bad expression anymore? The butler on the side smiled helplessly, his eyes flickering, and he pretended to be embarrassed and said, Crown Prince, the servants just saw that the princess had woken up and were looking for you. Look. What? Yuanzi woke up and was looking for me. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Upon hearing this, Xia Chuanzi's face suddenly changed, and his short legs stretched out before he planned to jump off the carriage. However, he turned his head in embarrassment and looked at Song Yuning. Mother. Just as his mother was about to speak, Song Yuning interrupted him and reminded him again, call me Aunt Ning. Okay. Xia Chuanzi flattened her mouth helplessly and said, Aunt Ning, Yuanzi is awake. I need to go back first, otherwise she won't be able to find me and will be anxious. This is. The butler on the side saw this and noticed the attitude of Xia Chuanzi toward Song Yuning, quickly asking. Song Yuning hesitated for a moment and said, I am Song Yuning, the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion, and my husband Xiao Jianqing. Nowadays, she is increasingly unwilling to show off as Zhao's daughter. Law. Moreover, the identity of Zhao's daughter. Law should not last long. The butler was taken aback for a moment. As he grew older and more refined, his eyes lit up and he quickly bowed and said, so it's Miss Song. I've heard about Miss Song's fame for a long time, and I'm the butler of the Crown Prince's mansion. Thank you very much, Miss Song, for taking care of our young Crown Prince. This butler is also a second person. Even after knowing that Song Yuning was the wife of Xiao Jianqing, he still referred to Song Yuning as Miss Song. Upon hearing this, Song Yuning was shocked and didn't even understand the identity of Xia Chuanzi. Raising his hand and rubbing Xia Chuanzi's head, he said, Xia Chuanzi, so you're the little prince of the Crown Prince's mansion. Chapter 8. Song Yuning, don't be ignorant. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Song Yuning has also heard of rumors about the twin siblings of the Crown Prince and the princess in the Crown Prince's mansion. As the most favored son of the current emperor and the Crown Prince of the state of Chu, His Highness the Crown Prince has never been married. His lifelong affairs have become the most concerning thing for the Emperor and Empress. But what nobody expected was. One day, a pair of twins appeared out of thin air in the Crown Prince's mansion. No one knows who the mother of these twins is. And this person has become a taboo in the Crown Prince's mansion. The only thing that can be confirmed is that these twin sons with purple eyes are indeed the bloodline of Crown Prince Yijinyu. After all, in the entire state of Chu, apart from the deceased emperor, only the Crown Prince had such a pair of purple eyes. At this moment, Zaichuanzi blinked his captivating purple eyes and looked at Song Yuning with admiration, saying, "Mother, Aunt Ning is so smart. My father is the Crown Prince, should Aunt Ning go back to the Crown Prince's mansion with me? Other people's fathers and mothers live together. So, his mother naturally wants to go back to the Crown Prince's mansion with him and live with his father." Looking at his cute and adorable appearance, Song Yuning had a look of love and affection in her eyes that she had never noticed before. She smiled and comforted, "Little Tuanzi, if there's a chance, I'll go to the Crown Prince's mansion to see you." Whether as the general's wife or the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion, she always has the opportunity to deal with the Crown Prince's mansion. So, this is not considered cheating children either. Upon hearing her say this, Zaichuanzi smiled happily and nodded, "That's great, Aunt Ning, don't lie to me." "I won't lie to you." As she spoke, Song Yuning saw an impatient expression on the faces of the steward and guards of the Crown Prince's mansion beside her. She took the initiative to pick up the little boy from the carriage and said, "Go back quickly. Don't make your sister wait too long." Upon hearing her mention of her younger sister, Zaichuanzi dared not delay any longer and quickly got into the carriage of the Crown Prince's mansion on the side. Until the carriage walked far away, he still smiled foolishly, constantly recalling the embrace he had just held in his mind. "Hee, your mother's embrace is so soft and fragrant. After returning to the mansion, I must tell Yuanzi that your mother is really beautiful and gentle." Song Yuning naturally did not know that his embrace had given Zaichuanzi the capital to show off with his sister after returning to the Crown Prince's mansion. After separating from Zaichuanzi, it was already dusk when I returned to the general's mansion. Just as I returned to my own yard, I saw a group of servants kneeling on the ground in a crowd. Upon seeing this, her face darkened and she approached the door with a condensed expression. As expected, I saw Xiao Jianqing and Wan Shishir sitting in the room with a romantic and concubine-like demeanor. At this moment, Wan Shishir's eyes were filled with tears, and she twisted a silk handkerchief with great grievances, wiping the corners of the watery eyes. Even though Xiao Jianqing comforted her with heartache on her face, it was of no use. Seeing this scene, Song Yuning stopped moving forward and felt that his Ning Xian garden, which he had lived in for 5 years, had suddenly been made filthy and had a feeling that even the air was filled with a foul smell. If possible, she wished she could turn around and return directly to the Wuhou mansion, no longer having to stay here, facing these two disgusting scumbags and lowly women. "Do you still know to come back?" At this moment, Xiao Jianqing saw her standing at the door. Her face, which was originally gentle like water, suddenly turned into icy coldness, and her voice spoke coldly. Upon hearing this, Song Yuning curled her lips and smiled without a hint of warmth. "General, why did you say this? Why didn't I dare to come back?" "Song Yuning, if you contradict your mother today, it's okay if you don't regret it. You turned around and left the mansion, only to come back now. Even now, you dare to ask me why." Xiao Jianqing looked at the woman in front of him. In fact, the woman who occupied his wife's position in front of him was not much better than a stranger to him. After all, 5 years ago, after paying respects, he left the capital and went to the border without even unveiling his hat. And since returning to the mansion the day before yesterday, it has been the first time he has faced each other squarely and had formal communication. Song Yuning gave him the impression of being just a shameless and promiscuous woman. If it weren't for her being the Wuhou mansion behind her, how could he have given her his only legitimate wife's position? Confronting the old lady. If the general points out that I have refused the old lady's request for me to adopt brother Lu, then let's consider me contradicting the old lady. Song Yuning let out a soft sneer, fearless of adding guilt. Moreover, the two people in front of him were already a pair of shameless individuals who resorted to any means to achieve their goals. Song Yuning, don't be ignorant. You can't have children on your own. Poetry and poetry consider the overall situation and kindly let you raise your children. If you don't want to be grateful, it's okay. You dare to refuse. You are simply unreasonable. Xiao Jianqing looked at her with a disgusting expression. If it weren't for the sake of having a good background for Lu Gur, which would be beneficial for him to take the imperial examination, how could I be willing to let Lu Gur recognize such a promiscuous woman as his mother? The general said I can't have a child. Upon hearing his accusations, just like his mother's, Song Yuning smiled angrily. If I couldn't give birth, what would have been the one who was pregnant for over 8 months? If it weren't for your mother forcing me, who was pregnant for over 8 months, to take care of my affairs, how could I slip and give birth prematurely, so that the child in my belly, who was about to mature, would be gone? Speaking of this, Song Yuning couldn't help but recall the heartbreaking feeling he had when he finally stopped bleeding from his premature birth and learned that the child he gave birth to was a lifeless dead baby. If her child were still alive, she would probably be as cute as the little prince she met today. Xiao Jianqing looked at the mournful expression on Song Yuning's face and let out a cold snort, with a hint of mockery in his eyes, without any emotion. Just coldly speaking up, if you want to blame yourself for being too careless, there are so many people who are pregnant and still need to manage their affairs. How come we don't see others slip and give birth prematurely? It's just that you're being too emotional. Now that you have injured your body and are unable to conceive, fortunately Shirshir has a kind nature and is willing to give you her child. Don't you thank her well? As for the dead child, it can only be said that he was unlucky to have surrendered to our general's mansion. Since he is already gone, let's not mention it again to avoid bad luck. Bad luck. Xiao Jianqing, that's also your child. How can you say that? Do you still have a conscience? Although he knew that Xiao Jianqing had no feelings for him, when he heard that their child was unlucky, Song Yuning still inevitably felt a chill in her heart. Tiger poison doesn't even eat children. What she lost in the beginning was also his bloodline. How could he be so indifferent? Chapter 9. If you want to fight, just fight. Do you still have to choose a day? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wuan Shirshir, who had been snuggling up in Xiao Jianqing's arms as soft as bone, looked at Song Yuning's sorrowful expression, her eyes flickered, and she said coquettishly, "Sister, why should a child who has died for several years be angry with the general? The general has been working hard enough to defend the border for the past 5 years. He didn't even blame you for not keeping his bloodline. How could you turn around and blame the general? It's really unreasonable." Upon hearing her pretentious words, Song Yuning sneered lightly, as if looking at something dirty, and said, "Do you have the right to interrupt when I talk to the general?" Wuan Shirshir clearly did not expect that Song Yuning would dare to be so merciless in front of Xiao Jianqing, but it did not prevent her from continuing to cry to Xiao Jianqing, "General, I am only kind to comfort my sister. Why is my sister so sharp in her words? It really scared me to death." Xiao Jianqing immediately hugged her with heartache and comforted her in a soft voice, "Don't be afraid of poetry, there is a general here." After speaking, he glanced coldly at Song Yuning and said, "Song Yuning, poetry is just a kind consolation to you. How could you treat her like this? Are you really an unreasonable jealous woman? So, the general wants to answer my question on her behalf. In what capacity did she intervene in the affairs of the general's mansion? Whether she is a concubine or a concubine, how qualified does she have to intervene in the conversation between the mistress and husband?" Song Yuning looked at Xiao Jianqing with cold eyes and asked sharply, "You?" Wuan Shirshir's face suddenly turned red. She was unwilling to be carried into the general's mansion as a concubine by a small sedan chair, so even after returning to Beijing for a few days, she still lived in the general's mansion with unknown identity. Unexpectedly, Song Yuning used her identity directly as an article, ignoring her intentional provocation. Does this woman not know that status and other things are secondary, and only by grasping the general's heart is the most important thing? She has already given birth to 2 sons for the general. With these 2 sons by her side, if she firmly grasps the general's heart, the general will naturally give her a dignified identity in the future. Madam, I don't ask for any status as a concubine. As long as I can accompany the general, I am already sufficient. The general is the emperor of my concubine and 2 children, so as long as the general speaks, my concubine is willing to give both children to the wife. Madam, please don't be angry with the general just because of my concubine's status. My husband is my wife. Since my wife comes from the Wuhou mansion, I believe she understands this better than my concubine. Seeing that Yuan Shishir dared to mention the Wuhou mansion, Song Yuning's face suddenly darkened. She took 2 steps forward, raised her hand, and slapped her face heavily. Ah! Yuan Shishir never expected that in front of Xiao Jianqing, Song Yuning would dare to take action against him. Until there was a burning pain on my face, I finally realized it and looked at the man next to me with tears in my eyes. General! Madam! How could she? Song Yuning, how dare you write poetry? Xiao Jianqing suddenly stood up, his face full of heartache as he embraced Yuan Shishir and glared angrily at Song Yuning, as if the anger in his eyes was about to burn her to ashes. If you want to fight, just fight. Do you still have to choose a day? Not to mention that she is only an outsider now, even if she enters the general's mansion, she will only be a lowly concubine. As the main mother of the general's mansion, why not teach a concubine a lesson? Song Yuning looked coldly at Xiao Jianqing, gave a cold smile, and said, of course, if the general loves the beauty and doesn't want her to be set by me in the future, it's not difficult. Seeing the 2 of them turning their gaze towards each other upon hearing this, Song Yuning calmly said, as long as the general and I sign the letter of separation, I will immediately turn around and leave, giving up the position of the general's wife. Everyone will be happy. What does the general think? Upon hearing that she was willing to give way, Yuan Shishir's eyes suddenly lit up with a look of surprise. She quickly looked up at Xiao Jianqing and called out coquettishly, General. However, Xiao Jianqing ignored her and looked straight at Song Yuning, saying in a deep voice, Song Yuning, do you think you want to leave? No mistake, our marriage was a mistake back then. Now that the general has a beloved one, I will naturally give up my position as the general's wife, which I did not belong to, and fulfill the general's wishes. Song Yuning faced his scrutinizing gaze without blinking or avoiding it. Seeing her like this, Xiao Jianqing felt a panic in her heart. Everyone in the capital knows that he married Song Yuning because he had to cook raw and ripe rice. But only he knew very well that he had designed this marriage by all means possible. On the day of success, the Xiao family was overjoyed. As for the day of his wedding, the reason why he left the border without even lifting his veil was not only due to the poor self-esteem and inferiority he had developed due to his high marriage. More importantly, it was because he knew that by neglecting Song Yuning in such a way, he was able to suppress the unyielding pride of Song Yuning, the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion. Let her mother tease and train her. In his view, the pain of losing a son, combined with 5 years, was enough to make the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion, who was known for her noble status of gold and jade, lose all her pride after sparring. But now, looking at Song Yuning, who was still proud and full of radiance, Xiao Jianqing knew that he had made a mistake. Song Yuning is still the most delicate and unparalleled Song Yuning in the capital city. Don't bring up the matter of separation in the future. Marriage is of great importance, and it's not something you can casually talk about when you're angry. Xiao Jianqing looked a bit embarrassed and didn't dare to look at Song Yuning. That pair of overly dazzling eyes seemed to reflect his inner self, making his ugliness impossible to hide. The general's words are too serious. Your marriage to me was originally a mistake, and the old lady has never liked me. As long as you sign a divorce agreement, we will be happy and happy. Isn't it perfect? Song Yuning chuckled lightly and looked at Wan Shishir beside him, saying, besides, the beautiful woman next to the general has given birth to 2 sons for him. The general doesn't want his son to always bear the title of illegitimate son. Upon hearing this, Wan Shishir also felt anxious in her heart and quickly tugged at Xiao Jianqing's sleeve, saying, General. Since she has said so, why don't you? Shut up. Before she could finish speaking, Xiao Jianqing interrupted her sharply. At this moment, the man doesn't have the gentle and passionate appearance he had just now. A handsome face was gloomy and terrifying, and he glanced coldly at Song Yuning before speaking. I understand that Madam's words were lost because of Wan Shishir and her 2 children's affairs, which made her not worried. I haven't heard of the matter of Healy today. Madam doesn't need to mention it again in the future. In the past 5 years, I have been neglecting my wife. I will do my best to make up for her in the future. If I still have something to do, I will leave first. Madam, please rest earlier. Chapter 10. Staying in the main courtyard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This sharp and stern remark fell into Song Yuning's ear, but it actually confirmed Xiao Jianqing's guilty conscience. 5 years of neglect and waste are not something that can be compensated for in just a few words. Moreover, Xiao Jianqing kept her only to completely eradicate the Wuhou mansion in the future. It seems that if you want to separate, Xiao Jianqing's path is impassable, and you still need to slowly figure it out. Madam, General, they have already left. Chuha couldn't help but worry as he watched Song Yuning stand still staring at the direction the general was leaving, lost in thought. Chuha, light some incense and dispel the bad luck in Ningxin Garden for me. The sweet and greasy aroma of Wan Shishir filled the room, and Song Yuning didn't want to stay here for a long time. He calmly explained and then returned to the bedroom. In the middle of the night, Fu Shou Tang. After leaving the main courtyard, Xiao Jianqing was troubled by the coquettishness of Wan Shishir, and she was rarely left with a cold face to visit her bedridden mother at the Fushou Hall. Why is my son here? Han Mama, help me sit up quickly. The old lady leaned lazily on the bed, only to see a hint of expression in her eyes when she saw Xiao Jianqing. She lost the support of Li Mama today due to Song Yuning, and was knocked out by her tone of 3 words. At this moment, seeing her son coming, it seemed as if she had found a support. How is my mother's body? Xiao Jianqing looked at his mother's tired face and pressed down on the troublesome matter, then turned to ask Han Mama beside him. Han Mama is not as eloquent as Zhao Mama. The anxious old lady kicked her out and took Xiao Jianqing's hand to cry in person. Today, Song Yuning seemed to have changed her personality. With just a few words, she showed off her great authority and sold Zhao Mama next to me. She even made me dizzy with anger. The old lady's words were poignant, but Xiao Jianqing was someone who knew the inside story. He had already understood before when he planned to marry Song Yuning that the legitimate daughter of the Wuhou mansion had a very soft personality, otherwise he wouldn't dare to use innocence to design for her. But the piles and pieces he knows today do not match those of Song Yuning in the past. Xiao Jianqing furrowed his brow and held the old lady's hand in reverse, saying in a deep voice. As my son and mother thought, Song Yuning's temperament was indeed different from before. Today, she even said she would give up her position as a legitimate wife to Shishir and I, and leave. This sentence was like a bolt from the blue for the old lady. Although she did not like Song Yuning, she could not abandon the immense wealth and prestige that backed the Wuhou mansion. If it weren't for the protection of the Wuhou mansion, how could Xiao Jianqing have been promoted repeatedly in the military, and how could their general's mansion intersect with the duke's mansion at once? Can't be separated. I don't know how Song Yuning's personality, which was controlled by others, changed so much. Perhaps you were too eager to bring back the extramarital mother and son, which hurt her heart. The old man was calculating in his heart and couldn't come up with a reason, so he couldn't help but worry. Xiao Jianqing heard his mother's analysis, which made sense. Women are good at picking on sourness and jealousy, but it was only because he overly favored Ruanshi and poetry, which angered Song Yuning. Remembering the family letter written by Song Yuning to him during his time on the border, which showcased his noble upbringing between the lines, and the fact that the affairs of the general's mansion had been taken care of in an orderly manner over the past 5 years, he felt at ease outside. But in the end, Song Yuning cannot tolerate Ruanshi and his 2 sons. He dares to strike people in his presence today. If Song Yuning is left alone, I don't know what kind of trouble will happen in the house. But my son doesn't want to disappoint Shishir and my child. The old lady couldn't help but feel a little anxious when she saw Xiao Jianqing still being stubborn and unable to comprehend, and interrupted urgently. The most important thing now is to stabilize Song Yuning and the Wuhou mansion behind her. Your foundation in the army is unstable, and if you rashly provoke the Wuhou mansion, it will not be a good thing for you and those 2 children. Listen to your mother, even if you don't like Song Yuning, you still have to show off. These days, I will leave your concubine's room to stay in the main courtyard. This can not only soothe her, but also block those gossiping tongues outside. After saying these words, the old lady's face became even more tired, and she didn't want to keep her son talking when she saw his face loosen a bit. Go ahead. Xiao Jianqing walked out of the Fusho hall with a cold face, not feeling any lightness in his heart. With the dim and hazy moonlight, he walked to the main courtyard. Madam, the general has sent someone to deliver a message that we will stay overnight at Ningxin Garden tonight. As soon as Song Yuning finished grooming and lay on the bed, he heard Chu He lift the bed curtain and spread the message to her with a joyful expression on his face. Madam, why are you unhappy? Chu He watched Song Yuning sit up expressionless, with an undisguised disgust on his face, and timidly stopped talking. A low-quality man who is constantly changing his ways is naturally not worthy of my bed. Even when Chu He mentioned him, Song Yuning felt inexplicably nauseous. General has already sent someone to deliver the message, what should we do? Song Yuning sighed as she looked at Chu He, who was rushing around in front of her, then turned to her ear chamber where she had just bathed, and pointed to the ice cubes in front of her to avoid the heat. Pour these ice into the bathtub and serve me to bathe again. Chu He opened his mouth in surprise, his lips twitching as he wanted to say something, but he touched the resolute and indifferent expression of his own young lady, so he had to pick up the ice inside the room and go to his ear room. General, be well. A vague greeting echoed into the room, and Song Yuning estimated that Xiao Jianqing had already entered the courtyard door, ready to get up and take a bath in the ear room. General. Please go and see Miss Ruan. She suddenly felt a severe heartache at night and has now been treated by a doctor. The crisp and eager female voice broke the silence of the night and stopped the footsteps of the 2 inside and outside the house. When Ruanshi was brought back by Xiao Jianqing, she was nameless and had no share, but people with discerning eyes knew that in the future, her mother and son would become half of the master and son. The servants in the mansion could only call out girls and dared not neglect her. But who dare a serious girl with her 2.5-year-old sons to show off in front of her mistress? Only a small family like the Xiao family in the imperial city would make such a joke. Song Yuning sneered inwardly and waited for Xiao Jianqing's answer as if listening to a play. The afternoon was fine, how could it be like this? Xiao Jianqing's indifferent tone carried a hint of anxiety and concern, and before the maid who came to convey the message could explain the reason, she strode out of the yard. Song Yuning sneered at the deep affection between the 2 and turned around leisurely back to the bed. Chu He could no longer bear it and pushed open the door to have the maid sent by Ruanshi to deliver the message driven out of the courtyard. Why, your wife is not liked by the general. Why bother to come and kill me, this little maid? Be careful that the general will punish you. The maidservant was also a person with a temper. She boldly shook off the hands of several maidservants and swaggered out of the yard. After receiving a lot of anger, Chuhi returned to the room, his eyes red as he complained to Song Yuning. That concubine is so shameless. How could anyone cut someone off in the main wife's yard? Madam, do you really mind? Song Yuning shook his head lightly and asked Chuha to go to the ear room to wash his face before returning artist palette reply. Madam. Chuha reluctantly went to the ear room to wash his face, and when he came out again, the candle beside the bed had already extinguished. Song Yuning's voice came through the bed curtains, calm and indifferent. Chuha, thinking too much is useless, going to bed and getting up early is the best. Chuha.